Short is the story, long is the life.
Wukong's archive presents China Urban Legends, The Six Tombs.
In the autumn of 2004, I was transferred to work in Shaoxing. My office was on Shengli West Road, not far from Fushan. I spent nearly half a month hunting for a place to live, and in the end someone led me to Cangqiao Straight Street, to an old house facing the river. The house was a two-story wooden building with black tiles and white walls, fronting a stone slab lane, with the river right at the doorstep, where black-canopied whooping boats rocked to and fro. The landlord's surname was Shen, 73 years old, short and stout, round-faced, with big ears. He spoke slowly, in a thick Shaoxing dialect, drawing out every final syllable. Old Shen said his family had lived on the street for 9 generations, and that his ancestors had once guarded the tombs of the Southern Song emperors.
The day I viewed the house, Old Shen took me around upstairs and downstairs. When we pushed open the back window on the second floor, it faced the river directly. The water was a murky green, flowing slowly. Old Shen stood by the window for a moment, then said, "You can live here, that's fine. Just one thing, if you hear someone call your name at night, don't answer. Whether it comes from outside the wall, or from under the bridge." I didn't think much of it at the time. I moved in mid-October. The osmanthus flowers had already withered, but the whole city was still steeped in their lingering fragrance. Old Shen's wife had passed away long ago, and his son lived in Shanghai. He lived alone in the courtyard next door, with a yellow dog named Huang. Every evening at dusk, he'd drag the bamboo chair out to the stone steps by the river and watch the whooping boats bob past, one after another, until it was dark.
I asked him where the name Cangqiao Straight Street came from. He said the bridge at the head of the street was Zangong Bridge. It was built in the Southern Song Dynasty, older than every house in this city. There used to be a granary under the bridge, where the grain collected by the government was stored before being shipped to linen. Shaoxing, this place didn't have much else, but it had plenty of grain, plenty of water, and plenty of graves. Plenty of graves? I asked.
Old Shen glanced at me and said, "Inside the city and out, everyone buried here is someone who never made it home."
That night, lying in bed, I could hear the river flowing beneath the window, splash, splash, like someone walking slowly through the water. The first story Old Shen told was about Lu Sun's family. The old Zhou family residence was at Duchin Feng Ko, not far from Cangqiao Straight Street. Lu Sun once wrote that there was a beautiful snake woman in the 100-grass garden who called your name from atop the wall at night, and if you answered, she would come eat your flesh. But what's in books stays in books. Old Shen said he'd heard the real version from his great-grandfather. His great-grandfather said that back in the Republican era, the old Zhou residence had long been sold to the Zhu family. One of the Zhu servants was passing by the back wall of the 100-grass garden one night when he heard someone calling his name from outside the wall, a thin, delicate voice, a woman's voice. He answered. The next day, he was gone. 3 days later, they found him by the well in the garden, sitting on the well's rim, eyes wide open. When they asked him questions, he wouldn't answer. Later a Taoist priest was summoned. The priest said something had been buried beneath that wall. When the wall was repaired in the 15th year of the Republic, 1926, a small coffin was dug out from under the foundation. Its lacquer had rotted away. Inside was a tiny skeleton, wearing a silver crown on its head.
The Zhu family was so frightened they buried the coffin back exactly as it had been, and burned spirit paper by the wall's foot for 3 days.
When Old Shen told me this, I asked him whether the beautiful snake woman in Lu Sun's book was real. Old Shen said, Lu Sun was a man of letters, and men of letters write things that are 3 parts truth and 7 parts fiction. But the wall around the 100-grass garden was real, and the thing buried beneath that wall was real too. His great-grandfather wouldn't lie to him. Later, I went to the 100-grass garden myself once. The garden isn't big, a few vegetable plots, wild grass growing along the walls. I stood at the foot of the back wall for 10 minutes and heard nothing at all. Outside the wall, though, some kids were chasing each other through the alley, shouting back and forth. I suddenly thought, if someone called my name from the foot of this wall at night, would I answer or not? Later I asked old Shen why the beautiful snake woman in Lu Sun's book called people's names. Old Shen said, the old folks used to say snakes don't call people's names. A thing that calls your name isn't a snake. It was the thing in that small coffin buried beneath the wall, borrowing the snake's reputation to call out to people. If it gets an answer, it can come out from under the wall. If it never gets an answer, it stays there, waiting for the next one.
He said that in Shaoxing's old houses, more families than just the Zhous had things buried beneath their walls. When the old folks built a house, they'd first bury something under the wall's foundation to anchor the dwelling. People buried all sorts of things: copper coins, tiles, clay jars, small coffins. Once buried, it became the house's foundation, and it couldn't be moved. If you moved it, the house became empty. That small coffin of the Zhou families was originally meant to anchor the house. But things used to anchor a house should be new, empty, and able to hold the house's spirit steady. That coffin was old, and there was still someone inside. Couldn't hold anything down. Instead, it turned.
Once it turned, it became that one beneath the wall, old Shen said. It can't get out, but it can't leave either. Whoever answers it, it drags inside to take its place. So it can get out. I asked, what does it want to get out for? Old Shen said, who knows? Maybe to go find its head.
Old Shen said, don't answer. If you answer, you go with it. He said the old rule in these parts of Shaoxing is, if someone calls you at night, don't answer right away. Listen carefully to who it is. If you can't tell who it is, pretend you didn't hear. A name, when you answer to it, you're handing your soul over into that person's hands.
I asked him whether that small coffin buried under the 100-grass garden was still there now. Old Shen said it was. When they repaired the wall again, they dug it up once more, the same coffin, the same tiny skeleton, the silver crown still on its head. They buried it back again. He said that thing has been buried beneath the wall for over 100 years, dug up twice, and buried back twice. It can't leave, so it just stays there waiting. Waiting for what? I asked. Old Shen said, waiting for someone to answer.
The second story is about Shen Garden.
Shen Garden is on Yanghe Lane, 2 streets over from Cangqiao Straight Street. During the Southern Song Dynasty, Lu Yu and Tang Yuan met there. Lu Yu wrote a poem, Chai Tu Feng, on the garden wall. When Tang Yuan saw it, she went home and died of illness. Lu Yu lived to be 85, and came back to Shen Garden every year, writing dozens of elegiac poems mourning her. Even at 84 he wrote, in Shen Garden the flowers bloom like brocade. Half of them once knew this old man Fengwing. He also wrote that he believed the beauty had turned to dust at last, yet could not bear how fleeting the dream had been. Old Shen said, Shen Garden is a place heavy with resentment. A man who writes poems all his life, unable to forget one woman. That's not devotion, that's debt. If the debt isn't paid off, the person can't leave.
I said, they've been dead for 800 years. Old Shen said, it's because they're dead that they can't leave.
Old Shen told me when he was young, back in the 60s, Shen Garden wasn't open to the public yet. It was abandoned, overgrown with weeds. One autumn night, he was passing by Yanghe Lane and heard someone in the garden reciting poetry. It was slow, word by word, the voice not loud. Sounded like a man, but also like a woman, he couldn't tell clearly. He stood outside the wall and listened for a long time. The voice just kept reciting those 4 lines over and over. Red soft hands, yellow tongue wine, the city full of spring, willows by the palace wall. When it finished, there was a moment of silence. Then it started from the beginning again.
Old Shen said he was young then and didn't believe in such things, so he wanted to climb over the wall and take a look. Just as he got to the top of the wall, the voice stopped. It was quiet for a long time. Then, suddenly, right at the base of the wall, through the wall, pressed against the plaster, a voice said, "Don't come in. If you come in, you won't be able to get out." Old Shen said he fell off that wall that day and couldn't get up for 3 days. From then on, he never passed by Shen Garden at night again.
After I finished listening, I asked him whether the voice was a man's or a woman's. Old Shen thought for a moment, then said, it was a man's voice, but the voice reciting the poem was a woman's. 2 voices.
One reciting inside the wall, one warning inside the wall, Old Shen said. The one reciting can't leave, and the one warning can't leave either.
That winter I went to Shen Garden by myself. I went during the day, bought a ticket. The garden was kept neat and tidy, with few visitors. The wall with Chai Tu Feng written on it was covered in glass. It had been recarved by later generations. I stood in front of the wall for a while, thinking about what Old Shen had said about the voice at the base of the wall, and suddenly felt a chill run down my back. There was a well in the garden, with a sign beside it. This well is the site of the meeting between Lu Yu and Tang Wan. I leaned over and looked in. The well water was black, no bottom in sight. Moss grew on the well walls, and a few dead leaves floated on the surface.
I stared at the water for a long time. There was nothing in it. After leaving Shen Garden, I circled around to Yang Lane and walked along the outside of the wall. The wall was white, with dead grass on top and moss hugging the ground at its base. I walked close to the wall, ears perked, listening. Nothing. On the other side of the wall were bamboo groves in the garden. When the wind blew, they rustled. I stood at the base of the wall and suddenly thought of Old Shen's words, "Don't come in. If you come in, you won't be able to get out." I didn't go in. To this day I still haven't figured out whether the "can't get out" the voice spoke of meant the garden, or something else entirely.
Batsi Bridge is on the east side of the city. It was built in the Southern Song Dynasty, and Liang Xiqing wrote about it in his books. The bridge isn't tall, and black awning boats can pass through under the arch. The bridge deck is made of stone slabs, and half of the railings are new, half are old. The old half was smashed in the 60s, and new ones were put in later. Old Shen said that at night you shouldn't walk across Batsi Bridge on the deck. You should walk underneath, beneath the arch.
I said, how can you walk under the arch, isn't that the river? Old Shen said, during flood season, when the river rises, there's a stone ridge under the arch that sticks up above the water, and you can walk on it. There's a rule passed down from the older generation, at night, when crossing Batsi Bridge, don't walk on the deck, walk on the stone ridge beneath the arch. The bridge deck is for the living. The bridge arch is for people hurrying on their way. I asked, what kind of people are hurrying, and why would they walk under the bridge?
Old Shen said, this rule was passed to him by his grandfather. His grandfather told him that during the Guangxu reign, there was a wonton seller who lived by Batsi Bridge. One night, after closing up his stall and heading home, he took the shortcut and walked along the stone ridge under the arch. When he got to the middle of the arch, he heard someone ask him what watch of the night it was. He answered without thinking, second watch. The next day he didn't come home. His family searched all night and finally found him under the arch, standing in the water which came up to his waist, eyes closed, not moving at all. They pulled him out, but his body was already cold, and there was still a smile on his face. After that, no one dared walk under the arch anymore. Grandfather said that wonton seller had answered that question, and so he'd gone to hurry along the road for someone else.
He went to hurry along the road for someone else. Where was the stop on that road? I asked.
Old Shen said even his grandfather didn't know. Grandfather said the ones hurrying on the road were soldiers who died on the road during the Southern Song Dynasty. Back then, Shaoxing was behind the front lines. Grain boats passed under Batsi Bridge, and soldiers passed under Batsi Bridge too. One year, when the Yuan army came, a grain transport fleet, men and boats together, sank in the river east of the city. When they pulled the bodies out, they didn't get all of them. The rest have been hurrying along this river ever since. When they reach the arch, they ask what time it is. If the time is right, the road opens up.
The road opens up to where? To the place where they sank, Old Shen said. They want to go back and see if their boats are still there.
I actually walked it once, later on. That winter, in November, I was coming out of a friend's house on the east side of the city one night. It was already past 11. I passed Batsi Bridge. The deck was pitch black, not a single person around. For some reason, I went down the stone steps at the landing and walked along the ridge. There was moss growing on the ridge, and it was slippery. I hadn't gone more than a few steps when someone suddenly asked me from under the arch, "What watch of the night is it?" It was an old man's voice, muted, as if it were bubbling up from under the water. I stopped. The arch was dark, pitch black, I couldn't see anything. The voice asked again, "What watch of the night is it?" I remembered what Old Shen had said, so I didn't answer. I stood there for about half a minute, and the voice didn't speak again. I moved step by step through the arch, got up on the bank, and looked back once. The arch was still pitch black, nothing there at all. When I got back to where I was staying, Old Shen was still awake, sitting at the door smoking. He glanced at me and said, "You walked under the bridge?"
I said, "How did you know?" He said, "There's moss all over your shoes." Then he said, "It asked you something, and you didn't answer, right?" I said I didn't. Old Shen stubbed out his cigarette and said, "If you'd answered, you'd have had to follow it. It asks what watch of the night it is, it's asking the time. If the time matches, there's one more person under the arch." I asked, "One more person, who would that be?"
Old Shen said, "It's someone hurrying on the road." The older generation said that during the Southern Song, Batsi Bridge was a gateway on the waterways, and every grain boat had to pass under the arch. Later, when the war came and everything was chaos, people who traveled by water died halfway, unable to get home. Their souls remember the road, and they're still walking it. If a living person walking at night answers the time, then they walk it for them.
Walk it for who? For someone who can't get home, Old Shen said. If you answer, he gives the road to you, and he stops walking. You walk it for him. If you walk until dawn, you won't be coming back.
Old Shen said that his ancestors had once guarded the imperial tombs for the emperor, and that was true. The emperors of the Southern Song were all buried in Shaoxing after they died. Linan was the capital, but the imperial tombs were on Zangong Mountain, 30 li southeast of Shaoxing City. 6 emperors, Gaozong, Shaozong, Guangzong, Ningzong, Lizong, and Duzong, along with their consorts, more than 100 graves in total, were all buried there. Why not bury them back in the north? Because the north was occupied by the Jin people. They couldn't go back. So it was called Zangong, meaning a place of temporary interment. They would stop here for now, and when the Central Plains were recovered, they would rebury them in the Northern Song imperial tombs at Gongyi. But that wait lasted until the fall of the Song dynasty. In the 15th year of the Yuan era, 1278 AD, Kublai Khan, Emperor Shizu of the Yuan dynasty, sent a monk from Tibet named Yang Lianzhenjia to serve as the chief of Buddhist teachings in Jiangnan. The first thing this man did when he arrived in Shaoxing was to loot the imperial tombs. He led a band of soldiers and dug up all the more than 100 graves at Zangong. The coffins were split open. The bones of emperors and empresses were scattered all over the ground, and jade, gold, and jewels filled over 100 carts. The worst off was Emperor Lizong. Lizong, Zhao Yun, had been on the throne for 40 years, and his body was very well preserved. Yang Lianzhenjia cut off his head, scraped it clean, coated it with lacquer, and made it into a drinking cup, inlaid with gold and silver, then brought it back to Dadu, the Yuan capital, for the Mongol nobles to drink wine from. In the days when Zangong was being dug up, there was a man in Shaoxing city named Tangqiao, courtesy name Yuan, a poor scholar. He sold his family's fields, exchanged them for wine and food, hired a bunch of people, and slipped into the tomb area at night. He picked up the bones of the emperors and empresses that had been thrown in the wilderness, one by one, placed them in wooden boxes, and secretly buried them elsewhere. The area around the Song Luling tombs is now a tea plantation. In the 1950s, the tomb grounds were leveled and planted with tea trees. The locations of the 6 imperial tombs were covered completely by tea. The stone steels were smashed. Some of the stone statues were buried in the earth. Others were hauled off to build reservoirs. Decades passed, and even the local young people had no idea that emperors lay buried beneath that stretch of tea fields.
The old man who watched over the tea plantation was surnamed Zhao, and he lived in a one-story house at the edge of the fields. Old Shen knew him, and said his grandfather had been one of the tomb guardians.
I went to the tea plantation once with old Shen. Old Zhao was past 70, thin, dark-skinned, and spoke even less than old Shen. He pointed at the tea fields and said, "This stretch, Emperor Gaozong. This stretch, Emperor Shaoxing. This stretch, Emperor Lizong." He pointed casually, like he was pointing at his own vegetable patch.
I asked, "How do you know all this so clearly?"
He said, "My grandfather told me, and his grandfather before him. People who guard tombs can find the graves with their eyes closed."
Old Zhao said, "The tea plantation has its rules. You can pick the tea, you can pull the weeds, but you can't dig down." One year, some officials came to do some kind of survey, and they wanted to drill holes in the tea fields. Old Zhao couldn't stop them. They drilled for 3 days. On the 3rd night, old Zhao heard sounds coming from the tea fields all night long, rumbling, like a lot of people moving stones down below. Early the next morning, the survey team said all their equipment was broken, and the data was all scrambled. They pulled up their drills and never came back. Old Zhao said, after that, the dogs around the tea plantation would start barking as soon as it got dark, and bark all the way until dawn. Not barking at people, barking down at the ground. I asked, "What's down there in the ground?" Old Zhao gave me a look and said, "You're asking me? My grandfather guarded this place his whole life and never saw it either. He only ever told me one thing: what's down there isn't dead people. It's people who haven't left." I asked, "People who haven't left, what kind of people are they?"
Old Zhao said, his grandfather told him that what was buried beneath the imperial burial ground wasn't just the emperors. The emperors were buried in the middle, and all around them were buried the tomb guardians, the officials buried as attendants, the soldiers who carried the coffins, the craftsmen who burned the funeral paper. When the Song Dynasty fell, Yuan soldiers surrounded the burial ground, and the guardian troops fought one battle and died to the last man, right there in the tomb grounds. These people died and were buried around the imperial tombs, with no one to set up steels for them. The emperors had steels. They didn't, old Zhao said. The emperors' heads were already taken away. Who's left to remember their souls?
He said his grandfather guarded the tombs until he was 70. One winter, in the middle of the night, he heard crying coming from the tea plantation. Not one person crying, a whole crowd of people crying, muffled, whimpering with their voices pressed down. Grandfather threw on his coat and went out to look. There was no one in the tea fields. Under the moonlight, the tea trees stood in rows, their shadows stretched long.
Grandfather stood at the edge of the tea fields until dawn. After dawn, the crying stopped. He went back inside and said one thing to old Zhao's grandmother: "They're counting."
"Counting what?" "Counting people," grandfather said. "Once the count is complete, they'll leave."
Shaoxing has many waters. In the city are rivers, outside the city are lakes. The largest lake is called Jianhu, also known as Mirror Lake. When he Zizong retired and returned to his hometown, he wrote, "Only the Mirror Lake before my door. The spring breeze still stirs the same waves as of old. That is the lake he meant. Lao Shen said that the water of Mirror Lake was clear a few hundred years ago, and now it's murky. Not murky because of pollution, but because there's a lot of stuff underneath. He said there are rules below Jianhu. In the deep places at the center of the lake, the older generation forbade people to go. In 1958, the year of the Great Steel Smelting, several villages by the lake organized a joint fishing operation, using a big net to pull something up from the center. The net tore a huge hole, and the thing fell back into the water. The men hauling the net said they saw a dark shadow, bigger than a boat, roll over once inside the net.
Lao Shen's father-in-law was in that fishing crew back then. Lao Shen said that after his father-in-law came back, he fell ill. After he recovered, he never set foot on the lake again. Asked what he saw, he refused to say no matter what. He only said one thing: under the lake, there's a road. A road. Lao Shen said that in his whole life, his father-in-law only ever said that one sentence. Until he died, he never explained who the road was for.
There's another matter. In the 1990s, when they were building a road along the Jianhu shore, they pumped out water and dredged the sludge, drying out a stretch of lakebed near the bank. Workers went down to clear the mud, and in the mud at the bottom, they found a road paved with bluestone, straight as a line from the direction of the shore, extending all the way into the deep center of the lake. The end of the road vanished into the water that hadn't been pumped away. The stones were covered in black mud, but they were laid neatly, one pressed against the next, clearly man-made. The workers got a shock and reported it up the chain. People from above came to have a look, said it was some ancient irrigation structure, and ordered it backfilled. On the day of the backfill, an old-timer said one thing: "This is for funeral processions. The dead in the city can't leave by the land road. They take the water road." Lao Shen said Shaoxing is a city of water. Funerals have to go by water. The coffin is carried onto a boat, and the boat rows out of the city, rows to the outskirts, rows to the burial ground. The rivers inside the city are the roads of the living world. The lake outside the city is the road of the underworld. The place where water and land meet is at Jianhu.
That road under the lake is for those who haven't finished their journey, Lao Shen said. They walk halfway, and the road breaks. So they stop in the lake, waiting for the road to be repaired and connected. I asked, when would the road ever be connected?
Lao Shen said, who knows? He said the older generation passed down this saying: the water of Jianhu connects to the sea. And where the sea connects to, no one can say clearly. Maybe the road is always being built, extending into the sea, and then it will be connected. That autumn, I went to Jianhu once. The lake was huge, the water a murky green, and when the wind blew, waves rolled toward the shore layer after layer. A few fishing boats were moored by the shore, and a boat boss squatted at the bow smoking. I asked him whether anything had happened on the lake in recent years.
The boat boss glanced at me and said, "You're not from here, are you?" I said yes. He said, "If you're from outside, don't ask. If you ask, then when you walk by the lake at night, your heart will turn creepy." I asked him what would happen if you walked by the lake at night.
He didn't answer. He threw his cigarette butt into the lake and said, "If you walk by the lake at night and hear someone calling you to take a boat, don't turn back. If you turn back, the boat will come to shore."
Zhuangtingku was at the center of the city, where Jiefang Road and Fuheng Street crossed. 100 years ago, Qiu Jin was executed there. Qiu Jin was the swordswoman of Jianhu, a native of Shaoxing. After her death, her family didn't dare to claim the body. It was the people of Tongshengtang, the charitable society, who buried her. Later, her grave was moved back and forth between Hangzhou, Hunan, and Shaoxing, moved several times. It wasn't until 1913 that she was laid to rest by the shores of West Lake. But the people of Shaoxing remembered her, and a monument was erected at Zhuangtingku. Zhuangtingku was no stranger to killing. Old Shen said that from the Qing Dynasty on, Zhuangtingku had been the execution ground of Shaoxing Prefecture, and the number of people killed there was beyond counting. During the years of the Taiping Rebellion, when the city was at war, dozens of heads were chopped off at Zhuangtingku in a single day. Blood flowed along the cracks between the flagstones, ran all the way down to the river landing, and the river water stayed red for days. The older generation said that the flagstones at Zhuangtingku were blue-gray, but the layer of soil beneath them was black. Black for several hundred years. After Qiu Jin's execution, every summer, a kind of small red flower would grow out of the cracks between the flagstones at Zhuangtingku. It was the size of a thumbnail and had no fragrance. The local old people called it the swordswoman flower and forbade anyone from picking it. They said that if you picked it, you'd hear someone sighing in the night. Old Shen said that the day Qiu Jin was executed was the 6th day of the 6th month on the old lunar calendar, and the weather was very hot. The prison cart was pushed along Fuhing Street, and she wore a white blouse, her head held high the entire way. When she reached Zhuangtingku, the supervising executioner asked what she wanted. She said, "A sheet of paper and a brush." On the paper, she wrote 7 characters. "The autumn wind and autumn rain sadden the soul." After writing, she threw down the brush and said, "Go ahead." Old Shen said his great-grandfather hadn't dared to go watch that day. But those words, his great-grandfather had learned them word by word from people who were there that day. He learned them and remembered them for a lifetime, then told them to Old Shen. "The year I went to Zhuangtingku, it was autumn, and the flowers had already withered. Beneath the monument, in the cracks between the flagstones, a few stalks of dead grass grew, swaying back and forth." Old Shen said that Zhuangtingku was unclean at night. Not because of Qiu Jin. Qiu Jin was a hero, and heroes don't harm people. It was those who came to watch the excitement. He said that back in 1907, executions at Zhuangtingku were held in public. Before the execution, the prison cart would be pushed all the way down Fuhing Street, with people standing along both sides of the road. The gawkers, the ones throwing rotten vegetable leaves, the ones running alongside. On the day Qiu Jin was executed, even more people came to watch, packed in layers upon layers. Old Shen said that his great-grandfather had told him that for several years after Qiu Jin's execution, people passing by Zhuangtingku at night could hear the sound of a crowd. A low buzz, like thousands of people crammed together talking, yet you couldn't make out what was being said. And there were footsteps, clattering, pattering, like a great many people running after something. But all around, there wasn't a single person.
I asked him whether this was true.
Old Shen said his great-grandfather didn't lie. His great-grandfather also said that once, when he passed Zhuangtingku at night, he heard, amidst the sound of the crowd, a woman's voice. Not loud, not soft, speaking clearly and distinctly. "Everyone disperse." The moment the voice fell, all that buzzing, those footsteps, gone. So quiet you could hear the wind.
I asked, "Who was that?" Old Shen said, "You tell me."
He said that the people of Shaoxing tell the story. When that monument at Zhuangtingku was erected, a handful of soil was pressed beneath it. Soil brought from Qiu Jin's grave by Westlake. The soil was hers, and the monument bore her name. With the soil and with the name, she was settled and able to leave. But those gawkers, 100 years now, are still packed in there, waiting for the next show. "The souls of gawkers can't leave," Old Shen said. "It's not that they can't go back. It's that they don't want to."
I wrote down everything Old Shen had told me, item by item, and went to the library to look it up.
The Shaoxing City Library is on Shengli Road, not far from where I was staying. In the local gazetteers, there were quite a few records about the Song 6 mausoleums. The Zangong Temporary Mausoleum Complex was built in the first year of Shaoxing in the southern Song, which was 1131, when Emperor Gaozong brought Emperor Huizong's coffin back from the Jin Kingdom and temporarily placed it there. From then on, every emperor who died was buried at Zangong, forming a vast tomb complex. Emperor Lizong's skull had indeed been made into a drinking vessel by Yang Lianzhenjia, and it wasn't until the Hanggu era of the Ming Dynasty that Zhu Yuanzhang recovered it and had it reburied. This was clearly recorded in the history books. I also found records about the tomb keepers of Zangong. During the Southern Song, the site had a supervisor and dedicated troops stationed there. After the song fell, the tomb keepers did not disperse. They guarded the tombs for generations. In the Ming Dynasty, the court sent tomb guard households. After the Qing Dynasty, the tomb guard households gradually drifted away, but some families still kept watch all the way into the Republican era. In the library, I found a Republican-era local gazetteer with a passage recorded in it. East of the Zangong tea plantation, there once stood a cluster of earthen mounds, which villagers called the imperial tombs. Locals passed down that in the still of the night, the sound of horses and chariots could be heard beneath the earth, like a great army passing through.
Horses and chariots. Old Shen's father-in-law had spoken of a road under the lake, and old Zhao had spoken of people moving stones underground. These matched the Republican-era record.
I also looked up what happened to Yang Lianzhenjia. This monk was later prosecuted by the Yuan dynasty and his family property was confiscated. Legend had it that, after robbing the tombs, he went mad and died. Another story said he hid all the treasure he had plundered, and after his death, the treasure vanished without a trace. There was a folk legend in Shaoxing that after Yang Lianzhenjia robbed the tombs, he lived in the city for several years, and every night he had nightmares. 6 figures in dragon robes standing by his bed, asking him, "Where are our heads?" The gazetteer also recorded one more thing that made my spine go cold. In the early Ming dynasty, Zhu Yuanzhang recovered Emperor Lizong's skull and sent people to bring it back to Shaoxing for burial. The party carrying the skull traveled by water. On the day the boat arrived in Shaoxing, the dock was packed with people. The gazetteer said that when the coffin came ashore, the sky suddenly darkened. Broad daylight, like it was about to rain. Someone saw behind the coffin a long train of shadows, some in official robes, some in armor packed tight together, stretching all the way back to the middle of the river. The official escorting the boat turned to look, and immediately went limp on the dock, unable to get up. This could, of course, be made up. But the gazetteer was an official compilation, and the old scholar who wrote the county records wouldn't have had any reason to invent such a story. I closed the book and sat in the library for a long time. Outside the window, the sky had already darkened, and I was the only one left in the reading room. It suddenly occurred to me that 600 years ago, that coffin holding Emperor Lizong's skull had been ferried into Shaoxing along this very river. If those shadows in the river were real, where did they follow it to?
To the tea plantation. I remembered old Shen's words. Underneath the tea plantation. In the winter of 2004, I got to know a taxi driver, surnamed Jean, in his 40s, a native of Shaoxing.
Once I was riding in his cab, and we got to talking about the Songlu Mausoleum. When Master Jean heard this, he said, "What a coincidence, I once gave a ride to a man who was going exactly there." He said it was in the autumn of 2002, on a rainy night. He was waiting for fares at the train station when an old man got in, wearing a gray cloth long gown, soaked half through. The old man said, "Take me to Zangong." Master Jean asked, "Where is Zangong?" The old man said, "Southeast of the city, the tea plantation." Master Jean said, "That place in the middle of the night, what are you going there for?" The old man didn't answer.
When the cab drove to the edge of the tea plantation, the old man told him to stop. Master Jean said that area around the tea plantation was pitch dark, not even a single light, and he asked the old man if he wanted him to wait. The old man said no need. He handed Master Jean a banknote. Master Jean went to make change, but the old man had already gotten out of the car, walked into the rain, took a few steps, and vanished.
Master Jean said he didn't think much of it at the time, and stuffed the banknote into his pocket. The next day when he looked, the money in his pocket had turned into a sheet of yellow paper. Spirit money.
I asked him, could he have misremembered? Master Jean said, no way I misremembered. He had tucked that yellow paper inside his driver's license and kept it for years. Later he lost it when he moved. I asked him again, what did that old man look like? Master Jean thought for a moment, then said, thin, very tall, wearing a long gown, and when he walked, his back was ramrod straight. Looked like an official. I said, an official, wearing a grey cloth long gown. Master Jean said, that's what I said too. But the way that old man walked, you could tell at a glance he was used to being in charge. He also said one thing that Master Jean remembered very clearly. When he got out of the car, the old man turned his head and said, 700 years, and still this same tea plantation.
Master Jean didn't understand at the time. Now that he thinks about it, he understands even less.
I asked Master Jean, the place where that old man got out, can it still be found now? Master Jean said, yes, it's right by the dirt road on the east side of the tea plantation. Now it's paved with asphalt, and there's an old camphor tree at the intersection.
That winter I drove out there myself. The dirt road had become an asphalt road, and the old camphor tree was still there. Beneath the tree stood a sign that read, Songlu Mausoleum Scenic Area Planning Zone. Underneath the sign were piled several old stones, with carved patterns on them, washed black by the rain.
I crouched down to look at those stones. One of them was carved with a section of robe hem. The pattern on the robe hem was that of a dragon.
I turned the stone over. On the back of the stone were carved two characters. It looked like someone had chiseled them out, but hadn't chiseled them clean, and they could still be made out. Yongmu Mausoleum, the tomb of Emperor Lizong.
Those stones had probably been dug up from the ground during surveying. They were just thrown by the roadside, under the tree, with no one tending to them. I stood beneath that old camphor tree and smoked a cigarette. It was almost dark, and the wind blew over from the tea plantation, carrying a smell of earth. I suddenly thought of that old man Master Jean had described. Wearing a grey cloth long gown, back ramrod straight, saying 700 years, and still this same tea plantation.
700 years ago, that was exactly 1278. The year Yang Lianzhenjia robbed the tombs.
Old Shen once told me something real, something he'd lived through himself.
In 1966, during the Destroy the Four Olds campaign, in Shaoxing, plenty of temples, ancestral halls, and memorial arches were torn down. The Batsi Bridge in the east of the city barely escaped demolition. Half the stone balustrades on the bridge were smashed before they stopped for some reason no one ever figured out. Old Shen said he was just past 20 that year, in the street Red Guard unit, running all over the city with the others. One day, officials came down from above, saying they were going to dig at Zangong Tea Garden. Word was they'd excavate the tomb of a feudal emperor and hold an on-site criticism session. Old Shen went along. He said it was raining that day, and a few dozen people showed up at the tea garden carrying hoes and shovels. The leader followed the map, drew a circle on the eastern part of the tea garden and said, dig. They dug for most of the morning down to a depth of over head-high, and then they hit blue bricks. A whole stretch of blue bricks, laid out perfectly neat. Someone yelled, we found it. Everyone crowded around to look. Black water was seeping through the gaps between the bricks. Someone pried one open. Beneath it was pitch black, and a chill air rose up carrying a smell you couldn't quite place. Like wood that had been buried for years, mixed with burned incense.
The leader crouched at the edge of the pit and stared for a long time. Then he suddenly said, fill it in. Everyone froze. The leader said, fill it in, and nobody says a word about this. His face was awful to look at. Old Shen said he saw it then. The leader's hands were shaking. The pit was filled. On the road back to the city, the leader walked at the very back. As he was walking, he suddenly squatted down by the roadside and threw up. When he was done, he stood up and said one thing to Old Shen, what's down there isn't a tomb.
Old Shen asked, then what is it?
The man didn't answer. A few days later, Old Shen heard the leader had been transferred, sent up into the mountains, and he never came back to Shaoxing. Some said he'd gone mad, some said he'd committed an error. No one ever knew what he saw at the edge of that pit that day.
Old Shen said he only remembered one thing. When they pried open the blue bricks that day, he was standing at the edge of the pit and he heard it from below, from very deep down, a knock. Dong. Like knocking on a door.
Not just one knock. 3 knocks. Dong, dong, dong. Then it stopped.
What happened after? I asked. After they filled it in, Old Shen said. As they were shoveling the dirt back, the sound started again. From under the earth, muffled through the soil, a dull thudding. It kept going until the pit was level. Once it was level, it stopped. He said that night when he got home, he lay in bed with nothing in his ears but those 3 knocks. He tossed and turned, couldn't sleep. He got up in the middle of the night to use the toilet, and passing through the main room, he saw his father sitting in a chair, no lights on, just sitting there in the dark.
His father said, "You heard it too?"
Old Shen said he was young then and didn't dare admit it. His father went on. Under Zangong, the ones knocking aren't dead people. When the dead knock, it's to announce a death. That thing down there, it's knocking to ask the way.
Ask the way where?
Ask the way home, his father said. The Southern Song emperors, every one of them died wanting to go back to Gongyi. Gongyi's in Hunan, but they can't make it back. So they knock. They've been knocking for hundreds of years, and no one's ever answered.
Old Shen said after his father said that, he went back to his room and slept. The next day, his father told him, "What happened today, bury it in your gut. Don't tell anyone, and don't go back to the tea garden." Old Shen said he kept it for 40 years. The first person he ever told it to was me.
In the spring of 2005, I decided to go to Songliuling, the tomb complex of the Southern Song emperors, on my own. Old Zhao had already passed away, died the winter before. The tea plantation had changed hands, now run by an outside contractor who only cared about picking leaves and had no idea what lay buried underneath. I reached the plantation on an overcast afternoon and walked plot by plot, following the places old Zhao had pointed out. Gaozong, Shaozong, Guangzong, Ningzong, Lizong, Duzong. The plantation was vast, rows of tea plants stretching out of sight. When the wind blew, the whole field rippled like water. I stood for a long time in the section belonging to Lizong. Lizong's skull had been made into a wine cup for 90 years, then recovered and buried beneath these tea plants. In the middle of that section, I spotted one tea plant that stood particularly tall, a full head and shoulders above the ones around it, green so dark it verged on black. All the other plants were trimmed neat and tidy. Only this one had never been pruned, its branches growing every which way, like a man who hadn't gotten a haircut.
I squatted beneath that tea plant and smoked a cigarette. It was nearly dark, and mist had begun to rise over the plantation. In the distance a dog was barking, one bark after another, not at me, but at the ground underneath. I stood up, ready to leave. And then I heard it. From far away, as if from the far end of the plantation, or as if from beneath the earth, came a sound. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Like many carriages and horses traveling down a very long road. Moving slowly, moving steadily. The sound drew nearer and nearer, until it reached my feet, and stopped. I stood frozen beside that tea plant, not daring to move. The sound halted for about a minute. Then I heard a very soft voice, right at my ear, as if someone were pressed against it, whispering.
"What watch of the night is it?"
I remembered what Old Shen had told me. I didn't answer. I kept my mouth shut, and step by step, I backed out of the plantation. The sound did not come again. On the road back to the city, it was already fully dark. I didn't look back once. When I got to my lodgings, Old Shen was sitting at the door in his usual way, smoking. He saw me and said nothing. I stood in front of him. After a long moment, I said, "Old Shen, under the plantation, someone asked me what watch of the night it was." Old Shen didn't respond. He finished his cigarette, ground it out on the ground, and said, "You didn't answer, did you?"
I said I hadn't. Old Shen said, "Good thing you didn't." He paused, then went on, "The ones who asked you under the Botsy Bridge and the ones who asked you under the plantation, they're the same lot. They're traveling, have been for centuries, and they can't reach the end of the road. When they run into a living person, they ask the time. If you answer, you have to take their place on the road." "Traveling to where?"
To where they want to go, Old Shen said. But where they want to go is in Hunan. That road, it never ends.
When he finished, he stood up, patted the dust off his pants, and went back inside. At the doorway, he turned around and said one more thing. "Tomorrow, go to the Shen garden. Go during the day."
"Why?" "Go during the day and look at that wall," Old Shen said. "See if the words on the wall are still there."
The next day, I went to Shen garden. I went during the day when it was crowded, tour groups arriving one after another. That wall inscribed with Cheitafeng was still protected behind a glass case. I stood looking at it through the glass for a long time. The characters were recarved by later generations, neat and orderly, not a single stroke out of place.
I stood in front of the wall for half an hour. Not a sound. That evening when I returned to my lodgings, Old Shen was sitting at the door again. He asked me whether the characters on the wall were still there.
I said they were. Old Shen said, "As long as they're there, it's fine. If the characters are there, the debt is there. If the debt is there, she's still waiting." I asked who was waiting.
Old Shen didn't answer. He looked across the river and said, "When I was a child, my mother told me a story. She said that while in Shen garden, every year a layer of the plaster falls off. People would pick up the fallen plaster, grind it into powder, and mix it into their ink. Characters written with that ink never fade."
"Who would do that?" "People who write." Old Shen said, "There are lots of people in Shaoxing who write. A person could write for a lifetime, just for a single sentence so that it could be preserved."
After he said that, he never mentioned Shen garden again.
That summer, I was transferred out of Shaoxing. Before I left, I went to say goodbye to Old Shen. He walked me to the mouth of the alley, a Huang following at his feet. He took something out from inside his jacket and handed it to me, saying, "Take this. It was passed down from my grandfather, an old brick from Zangong. You carry it with you, and the road will be safe."
I took it. It was a gray brick, the size of a palm, worn smooth, its corners all rounded. On the surface of the brick there was a faint line, like a door. I asked Old Shen where the brick had come from.
Old Shen said that his grandfather had been a tomb guardian. The gray bricks of Zangong had been pulled off the site back then to build a reservoir, and his grandfather had hidden one away. It had been passed down through 3 generations, and no one could say why it had been kept.
Probably afraid it would forget what it was. Old Shen said, "A brick remembers where it came from. A person shouldn't forget either."
I accepted the brick. I've carried it with me ever since, through several moves, and never lost it. In the autumn of 2011, I went back to Shaoxing on business and stayed for 3 days. Cangqiao Straight Street was still there, the river water still murky green. Old Shen had already passed away, the previous winter, at 81. Ah Huang was too old to walk much anymore, lying at the gate of Old Shen's courtyard. When he saw me, he lifted his eyelids a little.
Old Shen's son came back from Shanghai, handled the funeral, and rented out the old house. I asked him whether Old Shen had left any words before he died. His son thought for a moment, then said that half a month before his father died, one night, he suddenly told him that the tea plantation at Zangong was going to get a stone marker. He said he'd heard that people from the Cultural Relics Bureau had gone to look at it, and they said the imperial tombs were underneath. It was going to be protected and marked with a monument.
Old Shen's son said that when his father said this, he was very happy. He said, once the monument is up, people will remember. If people remember, they won't be considered abandoned anymore.
In 2012, it really was in the news. Shaoxing's 6 Song tombs, after archaeological survey. The locations of 4 imperial tombs, Emperor Gaozong, Emperor Shaozong, Emperor Ningzong, and Emperor Lizong, had been confirmed. In 2013, the 6 Song tombs were designated a National Key Cultural Relics Protection Unit. In the tea plantation, a monument was erected. I saw the photo in the news. At the location of Emperor Lizong's tomb, a stone marker stood. Around it, the tea bushes had been cleared away, revealing a stretch of flat land. In the corner of the photo, I saw a tree that had grown especially tall, its branches sprawling every which way, its green so dark it was almost black.
I don't know if it was the same tree from back then.
On the last night before I left Shaoxing, I went to Batsi Bridge again. The bridge was still the same bridge, a Southern Song bridge, the one Liang Lianzhenjia wrote about in his book. New streetlights had been installed on the bridge deck, bright and gleaming. Beneath the arch of the bridge, pitch black, the river water flowed slowly.
I stood at the head of the bridge for a while. No voice asked me what watch of the night it was.
On the way back to the hotel, I suddenly remembered something old Shen had said. He said that in Shaoxing, everyone buried here was someone who couldn't go home. The Zangong emperors couldn't return to Gongyi. The little coffin beneath the wall roots of the 100 Plants garden couldn't return to where it had originally been. The travelers hurrying through the bridge arches couldn't return to the bridge deck, and the gray stone road at the bottom of Jian Lake couldn't return to the shore.
Old Shen said, places you can't return to need someone to watch over them. I watch, the Zhao family watches, generation after generation, and if you keep watching, in the end, they stay put.
I can't watch over them. I'm only a tenant who lived there for a year.
That night I had a dream. In the dream I was still in that tea plantation, the sky yellow like an old photograph. At the site of Emperor Lizong's tomb, beneath that black tea tree, many people were standing in neat rows. Those in dragon robes, those in official robes, those in armor. A dense, dark crowd all facing north. They didn't speak. They just stood there, gazing north. North was Hangzhou. Further north was the Yangtze. Further still was the Central Plains. A home they could never return to. At the end of the dream, one of the people in dragon robes slowly turned his head and looked at me. He had no face. Where his face should have been was a mass of black.
I woke up. Outside the window, the river water gurgled as it flowed. I lay there and heard, from somewhere far away, maybe the eastern part of the city, a single dog bark. Once. Then silence. I touched the gray brick beside my pillow. The brick was cold. It had been cold all night. The story is finished. What do you think? If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. New urban legend every day.